Bruce Willis, the legendary icon of Hollywood, the man who turned wounds into box office triumphs and silence into strength. From a shabby house where arguments mingled with the sound of trains, he rose from the cracked streets of New Jersey to build an empire worth more than $250 million. He was not born into power. He built it himself, through scars, proud smiles, broken bones, and every fall that only made him rise stronger. No one burned brighter than he did. The bartender who became a legend, the ordinary man who redefined what it meant to be a hero. He gave the world Die Hard, and we learned how to bleed and smile at the same time. He gave us The Sixth Sense, and we understood that even lost souls could still feel love. But behind every explosion, every line, every smile that made audiences cheer, was a man silently fighting not to collapse beneath the weight of his own humanity. His fortune is immense, an empire built on sweat, blood, and sleepless years. On the sunlit hills of Beverly Hills, his mansion sprawls across more than an acre, with an emerald pool, a private screening room, and glass walls opening to the golden skies of California. In Idaho, he owns a lakeside retreat where summer blazes on the water like fire, a place he once called the only place I can breathe. In his garage, rows of luxury cars stretch like a museum of the American dream. White Rolls-Royces gleaming like ivory, a Porsche 911 thundering like a heartbeat, and a Cadillac Escalade that carried him across countless miles of film sets. He once earned millions for every role. Yet every check carried a bruise, every contract hid a sleepless night, and every mansion was a quiet crack in a weary soul. But this story is not about money. It is about the price he paid to earn it. Because behind that legend was a man who bled for every frame, who walked barefoot across the shards of life not only on screen, but in reality. Amid the cheers were moments of chilling silence, where he could hear himself slowly fading beneath the lights. Fame devoured his sleep, his breath, his laughter, until only the tired eyes of a man who gave too much remained. He smiled through heartbreak, endured pain, and kept giving even when his body begged for rest. And now, as the lights dim and his family stands beside that legacy, how can one not weep at the thought of all he endured? If Bruce Willis ever made you believe in courage, ever helped you feel less alone in your own battles, leave a heart, a like, as a tribute to this extraordinary man. It's hard to believe that the man who once saved the world grew up in a house he couldn't even save himself from. His story began not in stardom, but in the echo of arguments that cracked the thin walls of a small rented home, a house that shook each time a train thundered past, as if even the earth couldn't stand still for him. Bruce Willis entered the world on March 19, 1955, in Idar Oberstein, West Germany. Born into the gray silence of a post-war town still piecing itself together. His father, David, was an American soldier haunted by battles he never spoke of. His mother, Marlene, a young German woman who tried to build warmth out of rationed hope. They were poor, restless, and always half a step away from collapse. Some nights, the cold crept through the cracks in the walls and wrapped around his small body like another kind of hunger. He could hear his mother crying softly in the kitchen, the sound of her spoon scraping an empty pot, a sound he would never forget. In 1957, when Bruce was 2, the family left Germany behind, chasing the American dream across the Atlantic. But New Jersey offered no miracles. Their small home in Carneys Point was cramped and cold, where the wallpaper peeled and the air carried the faint hum of factories. Money was a ghost that never stayed long. His father's drinking blurred the days, his temper turned the nights heavy, and by Bruce's early teens, the marriage had splintered for good. The day his father left, Bruce didn't cry. He just watched the taillights fade down the street until the red disappeared. The silence that followed was louder than any goodbye. As the eldest of four, Bruce became the quiet guardian, the one who tried to make laughter out of chaos, to distract his siblings from the sounds that made them flinch. On the worst nights, when the shouting downstairs grew too sharp, he would press his hands over his little brother's ears and whisper, "It's okay." He didn't believe it, but saying it made him feel stronger. But no one could protect him from the silence inside his own mouth. He stuttered so badly that every word felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. "It felt like my mouth was full of cement," he once recalled. Once, standing in front of his class, he tried to say his name, and couldn't. The laughter that followed stayed with him longer than any lesson that day. The other kids called him Buck Buck. The name stuck, a scar no one could see, but one that never stopped bleeding. He stopped trying to speak. The fear of humiliation built walls around him higher than any stage he'd ever stand on. Rebellion came next, small acts of defiance against a world that had already decided he would lose. He picked fights, skipped classes, mouthed off to teachers. Once, at 19, he found himself on the wrong side of the street. A wake-up call more than a crime, the kind that leaves you staring into the mirror, wondering how far you've drifted from who you wanted to be. Beneath the anger lived a boy desperate to prove that he was more than the echoes of a broken home. Back then, even dinner felt like a small miracle. Then, at 17, everything changed. He stepped onto the stage of his high school auditorium, trembling, terrified. And something extraordinary happened. The moment the spotlight hit him, the stutter vanished. The words that once betrayed him now poured out smooth, alive, unstoppable. "That stutter was my first enemy," he would say years later, "and acting was how I beat it." For the first time, the applause didn't feel like noise. It felt like freedom. Those few minutes under the light rewrote the story of his life. The boy who couldn't speak had found a voice, and the silence that had haunted him became the fuel that would one day drive him to the top of Hollywood. Each performance afterward was more than acting. It was survival. A quiet rebellion against everything that tried to break him. The wounds of his childhood never left. They became the armor that made him unstoppable. And though the boy from New Jersey grew into a man the world would call unbreakable, the truth is simpler and far more human. He was broken first, and from those cracks, the light poured through. And so, the boy who once whispered to survive began to speak for a living. But dreams are never born in comfort. They're forged in the noise, the hunger, and the sleepless grind of survival. For Bruce Willis, the world was still a battlefield, only now the war was called New York. In 1973, at just 18 years old, he left New Jersey with a single suitcase, a half-eaten sandwich, and the memory of a stage that had once made him feel seen. He enrolled at Montclair State University to study drama, but the hunger in his stomach and the urgency in his heart were louder than any lecture. "I didn't have time to wait for life to happen," he would later say. So he dropped out, boarded a bus bound for Manhattan, and stepped into a dream that didn't want him. What awaited wasn't fame, it was the cold. The kind of cold that seeps through the floorboards and into your bones, whispering that you are still nobody. His first winter in Hell's Kitchen was merciless. The radiator coughed like an old man dying. The windows rattled when the wind howled, and the wallpaper peeled like the city itself was shedding skin. He slept in his coat, breath fogging the air, sometimes pressing his hands against the wall just to feel something warm. When rent ran out, he crashed on friends' floors, his few possessions packed in a duffel that always seemed too light. "I wasn't homeless," he said once, "but I was close enough to smell what it felt like." Food was a luxury. Some nights, dinner was a cup of tap water and a crust of bread gone stale. Other nights, he'd stretch a can of beans across 2 days. The hunger wasn't poetic. It was real. A dull, twisting pain that kept him awake longer than ambition did. His shoes were splitting at the seams, his socks stiff with cold, and every time he walked through snow, it soaked through like punishment. He took whatever work he could find, standing guard in empty factories that smelled of rust and oil. The silence so heavy he could hear his own heartbeat, hauling crates until his palms split open, chauffeuring strangers through highways that shimmered under sodium lights. But most nights, he bartended, in bars that smelled of smoke, sweat, and loneliness. The laughter was too loud, the music too harsh, the tips too small. The scent of spilled beer clung to him even after he showered, as if the city itself refused to let go. There were mornings when he'd wake before dawn and line up for auditions that stretched around the block, snow biting through his shoes, clutching a headshot that no one would ever glance at. Sometimes the casting director wouldn't even look up. He'd walk home with nothing but sore feet and coins that jingled like a cruel joke in his pocket. But each rejection hardened him a little more. "You learn to live with no," he'd later say. "You wear it like armor." Behind the bar, he became Bruno, a louder, braver version of himself. Bruno cracked jokes, poured whiskey like it was courage, and played the harmonica until the bar forgot its sorrow. It was a show every night, one without applause, but full of survival. "Every night was practice," he said. "I just didn't know what for." But beneath that grin was still the boy who once couldn't say his name without stuttering. Only now, his rhythm came from endurance. Those years didn't just test him, they sculpted him. The cold, the hunger, the humiliation, the endless nights of not knowing if tomorrow would be kinder. They carved a man out of a boy. "Those years weren't just about surviving," he said later. "They were about building armor. And that armor, forged in freezing apartments, empty stomachs, cheap bars, and countless rejections, would one day make him unbreakable. Because before Bruce Willis became the man who saved the world, he was the man who first had to save himself. It didn't begin with applause, it began with silence. The kind that comes right before a storm, when destiny holds its breath. For Bruce Willis, that storm broke in 1985, inside a cramped Los Angeles casting room where more than 3,000 actors had already tried and failed. He was scruffy, sleepless, and wearing the kind of grin that made producers nervous. But when he opened his mouth, the air shifted. The room didn't just listen, it stopped. The character of David Addison wasn't written for him, it was waiting for him. That day, the bartender from New York finally ordered a drink from fate itself, and the world would never be the same again. When Moonlighting premiered, television had never seen anyone like him. He was fast, funny, dangerously alive, the rebel who looked straight into the camera and made audiences feel he was talking just to them. The smirk, the spark, the defiance. It was lightning caught on film. Within months, Bruce Willis went from broke to beloved, from pouring beers to collecting both a Golden Globe and an Emmy. But fame, like fire, burns hot. The laughter on set hid exhaustion. The spotlight that crowned him also blinded him. "I had waited my whole life for this," he once said, "and when it came, I didn't know how to breathe." Then came 1988, the year the bartender became a legend. Hollywood handed him a script called Die Hard, a project so risky most actors turned it down. The studio doubted him. The press mocked the idea of a sitcom star saving hostages. He didn't have the muscles, they said, just the mouth. But Bruce didn't flinch. He stepped into the role of John McClane, and on that set, under blinding lights and endless retakes, he fought like it was real. He bled, he limped, he roared through pain so authentic the cameras didn't have to fake it. John McClane wasn't a superhero. He was a man bleeding, crawling, and surviving. When Die Hard hit theaters, it didn't just break records, it redefined the modern action hero. The film grossed over $140 million, spawning 4 sequels and a cultural icon. Overnight, Bruce Willis became a $5 million per film phenomenon, a fortune unheard of in 1988. He had gone from counting coins in New Jersey to signing contracts that could buy entire city blocks. But Hollywood, like gravity, always pulls back. The climb only got steeper. The 1990s were a war zone of brilliance and bruises. Look Who's Talking and Death Becomes Her reminded the world of his charm, but Hudson Hawk, his passion project, burned through $65 million and earned only $17 million. The media that once crowned him a hero now mocked him as reckless. Color of Night followed, losing $30 million, and for the first time since the bars of Hell's Kitchen, Bruce felt the ground shake beneath him. Headlines called him finished, but he kept going. "In Hollywood," he said, "you're only as good as your last movie, so I made sure my next one mattered." That next one came in 1994, when Quentin Tarantino offered him Pulp Fiction. Bruce took a massive pay cut to play Butch, the washed-up boxer, a character not unlike himself, battered but unbroken. It was a gamble. And when the film roared across screens, it wasn't just his career that came back. It was his soul. 5 years later, The Sixth Sense delivered another miracle. He played it quiet, haunted, restrained, a ghost in plain sight. The performance silenced every critic and earned $672 million worldwide, a number so staggering it seemed like Hollywood's way of apologizing. Yet, even in triumph, the grind never stopped. Bruce worked relentlessly, over 100 films across 4 decades. The hours were brutal, the pressure unending. There were nights he collapsed in his trailer between takes, shirt soaked in sweat, whispering to himself, "Don't waste this." He carried bruises you couldn't see, the kind that come from living too many lives for too many people. "Every applause fades," he said softly, "but the work, that's what stays." By the turn of the millennium, his net worth soared past $250 million. He owned sprawling estates in Beverly Hills and Idaho, his name synonymous with box office gold. But none of it came free. Every dollar was a scar. Every success carried the echo of all the nights he almost gave up. Bruce Willis didn't just rise, he endured. He wasn't the strongest man in Hollywood, but he was the one who refused to fall. And maybe that's why, even now, his legend still stands. Because heroes may save the world, but the greatest ones first survive themselves. It's almost cruel how life writes its own endings. The man who could outwit terrorists, save hostages, and survive explosions on screen couldn't stop the quiet implosion of his own home. Bruce Willis had fought every battle life threw at him, but this one came with no script, no director, no second take. The first crack in his seemingly unshakable world wasn't from a box office flop. It came from love. The kind that begins like a sunrise and ends like the slow dimming of light you can't stop. They met in the late 1980s, two rising stars in a universe built on illusion. Bruce Willis, fresh off his moonlighting triumph, still half bartender in spirit, and Demi Moore, luminous, magnetic, the woman who could silence a room with one glance. Their chemistry was immediate, undeniable, two fires colliding. By 1987, they stood hand in hand at the altar, a union so dazzling it felt almost cinematic. To the public, they were the golden couple, proof that fame and family could coexist, that love could survive the glare of Hollywood's relentless light. Their home was filled with laughter, music, and the tiny, perfect chaos of three daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah. Bruce adored being a father. After months of brutal filming schedules, he would come home, toss aside his scripts, and let his daughters climb over him, as if he were indestructible, both on and off screen. "That's when I'm really alive," he once said, "when I'm just dad." There are photos from those years, his arms full of little girls, his eyes soft, unguarded, the eyes of a man who'd finally found peace. But Hollywood has a cruel rhythm. Between his grueling film shoots and Demi's own meteoric rise, the distance began to stretch. Days apart became weeks, and then months. The laughter turned thinner, the silences longer. Fame doesn't destroy love. It erodes it slowly, grain by grain, until even the strongest bond begins to fray. By the late 1990s, whispers started, some from tabloids, some from the quiet corners of their own hearts, asking if love could really survive when two people were always living in separate worlds. In 2000, after 13 years of marriage, Bruce and Demi announced their divorce. The world was stunned. They had seemed untouchable, a couple who had defied the odds, raising three daughters under the flashbulbs and pressure of global fame. But behind the cameras, it hadn't been betrayal or anger, just two hearts that drifted apart while chasing dreams that kept them on opposite ends of the world. The day Bruce left their shared home, he later recalled, "The silence was heavier than any line I ever forgot on set." He walked through rooms that still smelled like childhood, the faint echo of giggles, the ghosts of pancake breakfasts. He paused by his daughter's bedrooms, beds neatly made, toys frozen mid-play, and felt the air pressed down like a weight he couldn't lift. The man who had saved the world, countless times on screen, couldn't save his own mornings from emptiness. The hardest part, he said quietly years later, wasn't losing a marriage. It was losing the sound of their footsteps. To the world, Bruce and Demi's divorce was an ending, but to them it became something rarer, an evolution. In a town built on feuds and bitterness, they chose grace. They stayed close, shared holidays, birthdays, even Christmas mornings. Proof that love can survive in a different form. "She's the mother of my children," Bruce once said. That doesn't end. Friends described their relationship after the divorce as strangely peaceful, built on mutual respect and an unspoken promise to always put their daughters first. Still, for Bruce, the quiet after the lights went out was its own kind of war. He had mastered roles that demanded strength and stoicism, but off-screen he faced a loneliness no camera could capture. He was now a father who couldn't be there every morning, every bedtime. His work took him halfway across the world, explosions, scripts, premieres, while his daughters grew up between phone calls and weekend visits. He never complained. He simply worked harder. But in rare moments of honesty, he admitted the ache. you just hope you're giving them enough, even when you're not there. There were weekends when he'd fly home, only to find himself studying their faces, realizing how much he'd missed. A new haircut, a new laugh, a part of childhood that had quietly passed without him. Fame gave him everything he had once dreamed of, and yet it robbed him of time, the one currency he could never earn back. Between takes, he would sometimes sit in his trailer, script in hand, staring blankly at the page, his mind miles away, in a house where his daughters were probably already asleep. After the divorce, reports suggested Demi received a substantial portion of their shared estate, though both kept the details private, out of respect for their family. Bruce retained properties in Haley, Idaho, and Beverly Hills, worth millions, but no division of wealth could measure the price of what he'd lost. For a man who had built an empire of over $250 million, the one thing he couldn't buy was presence. "I was rich," he once said, "but what I wanted most, money couldn't fix." And that's what makes his story ache. Not because it's tragic, but because it's real. Bruce Willis had conquered Hollywood, built an empire from thin air, but even legends can't outrun the cost of being human. He never blamed fame, never blamed love, only time. "You learn," he reflected years later, "that sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes its address." So when his daughters grew older, when the laughter returned in fragments and the family could share a table again, there was no bitterness, only gratitude. Gratitude that love had survived in a world that breaks most things. Bruce Willis once said, "Being a father is my greatest role." And perhaps that's the truest ending of all. Not in the box office numbers or the red carpets, but in a man who, even after losing the home he built, never stopped fighting for the people inside it. It feels almost unbearable to believe that the man who once ran barefoot across broken glass, who laughed in the face of danger, who redefined what it meant to be unstoppable, is now fighting an enemy no stunt double can shield him from. The world had seen Bruce Willis bleed, sweat, fall, and rise again in over 100 films. But nothing, no flop, no heartbreak, no injury, could prepare anyone, not even those who loved him most, for the quiet, merciless war that awaited him. By the late 2010s, Bruce had already lived the kind of life most people only dream about. He had been the smirking hero, the haunted soul, the everyman who made courage look beautifully ordinary. Yet, somewhere between scripts and spotlights, something began to shift. It didn't happen overnight. It crept in, slow, invisible, unspoken. Around 2020, at 65, Bruce began taking roles in smaller, low-budget productions, projects that seemed far beneath the man who had once ruled Hollywood's golden halls. To outsiders, it looked like a strange detour, a quiet decline. But behind that decision was not weakness. It was willpower. He wanted to keep working, to keep feeling alive, even as his mind began slipping through his fingers. At first, the signs were subtle. He'd stumble over lines he had rehearsed 100 times. He'd pause mid-scene, his eyes searching for words that refused to come. Directors, out of quiet compassion, began adjusting, rewriting scenes, simplifying dialogue, slipping an earpiece into his ear so that someone off-camera could feed him his lines. To those who didn't know, it might have looked like carelessness. To those who did, it was heartbreak. He just seemed quieter, his wife Emma Hemming Willis recalled, less talkative, less engaged, as if he was drifting somewhere we couldn't follow. By 2021, the whispers had grown louder. Scripts got shorter, his scenes fewer. Crew members worked gently around him, not out of pity, but out of love. He would still show up smiling, that same half grin that had once lit entire theaters. But between takes, he sometimes drifted, eyes glassy, lost in thoughts no one could reach. It was like watching a man wrestle shadows, still fierce, still fighting, but losing ground inch by inch. Then came March 2022, the day the curtain finally fell. His family, his fiercest protectors, shared the truth. Bruce had been diagnosed with aphasia, a condition that steals speech, comprehension, and the very bridge between thought and language. The man whose words had once filled cinemas across the world, yippee-ki-yay, echoing through generations, could now struggle to form even a simple sentence. It was as if the sound of Bruce Willis, the voice that had become part of Hollywood's heartbeat, was being swallowed by silence. And then, in February 2023, came the second, crueler blow. Doctors confirmed the disease had progressed. It wasn't just aphasia, it was frontotemporal dementia, FTD, a degenerative illness that slowly dismantles everything that defines a person: speech, motion, empathy, awareness, and eventually, identity itself. The headlines called it tragic, but Emma called it something else: a fight for presence. "I was panicked," she said in a tearful interview. "When I heard the diagnosis, it felt like free falling into darkness. I left the doctor's office with nothing. No cure, no plan, just fear." Still, she refused to break. She became his shield, his advocate, his voice. Alongside Demi Moore and their 5 daughters, Rumor, Scout, Tallulah, Mabel, and Evelyn, Emma built a quiet fortress of love around him. They learned new ways to communicate, through touch, music, and memory. "His brain is failing him," Emma said softly, "but he's still here." Bruce's doctors describe FTD as relentless, a gradual, unstoppable fading. But his family has learned to see light inside that darkness. He may forget faces, words, even names, but there are still flashes. That hearty laugh that once shook movie sets, the mischievous twinkle in his eye that suddenly returns, only to disappear again moments later. "When I see that smirk," Emma said, "for a second, it's like he's back. He no longer reads scripts. Sometimes he doesn't recognize them, but he still walks, strong, upright, guided gently by those who love him. The man who once leapt through fire and explosions now moves carefully, measured not by the roar of applause, but by the rhythm of a slower world. Soft sunlight through the window, the warmth of a daughter's hand in his. He hums sometimes, faint, uneven, the remnants of a tune from his Bruno days. It's not performance anymore, it's memory, speaking without words." In the ABC News interview, Diane Sawyer described visiting him without cameras. She sat beside him on a quiet patio. Bruce reached out, wordlessly took her hand and smiled. "There was still that spark," she said. "It was Bruce. For a moment, it was Bruce." Moments. That's what his family clings to now. Not days, not hours, but moments. A glance, a laugh, a fragment of recognition that reminds them that behind the fog, the man they love still exists. Rumor once said, "Even if he can't say it, we feel it. He's still Dad." And through Emma, Bruce continues to give something greater than words: awareness. She has written The Unexpected Journey, a guide for caregivers walking the same road, transforming pain into purpose. "These caregivers are heroes," she said. "I didn't have a roadmap. Now, I want others to have one." Her advocacy has inspired researchers across the world. Even leading doctors now call her a beacon of courage. So, yes, the unbreakable man is quieter now. The hero who once shouted defiance through fire now speaks through silence. And yet, the message is louder than ever. He fought villains, explosions, fame, failure, and time itself. Now, he fights the most human battle of all, the one no one wins, but where love still endures. Because maybe heroism was never about the stunts or the one-liners. Maybe it's about this: the way he still squeezes his daughter's hand, the way his wife still whispers, "He's here." And perhaps that's the cruelest, most beautiful truth of all, that the man who once saved the world now teaches it what love looks like when words are gone. Because the measure of a hero isn't how loud his voice is, it's how deeply he's remembered when the world falls silent. And for Bruce Willis, the silence will never win. Around Bruce stands a family bound by something rarer than fame: unity. Demi Moore, his former wife, and their daughters Rumer, Scout, and Tallulah remain close, sharing holidays and simple days that no script could ever write. His two youngest, Mabel and Evelyn, bring a gentler rhythm to his world, leading him by the hand through the garden, showing him sunlight, birds, or flowers, as if introducing the world to him again, one color at a time. And he smiles, sometimes faintly, sometimes fully, but always truly. They call it the new kind of together. It's not the family dinners or the film premieres anymore. It's the everyday gestures. A shared song, a touch, the soft hum of a familiar melody that stirs something deep inside him. FTD may steal comprehension, but it cannot steal connection. Emma once said, "We're in this together. That's how we get through it." And they do, not through grand gestures, but through the grace of consistency, showing up, holding on, staying present. Every now and then, there are flashes, tiny miracles that feel like sunlight breaking through cloud. A sudden spark in his eyes when one of his daughters laughs. A soft squeeze of Emma's hand during a walk. The moment doesn't last long, but it's enough. Enough to remind them that love hasn't left. It's only learned a different language. There's a video. Simple, tender, unforgettable. Bruce sits in the garden, the afternoon light spilling across his face. His youngest daughter leans against him, her small hand resting on his chest. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His hand, weathered, trembling, yet steady, rises slowly to her back. A father's instinct, untouched by time or illness. That image has stayed with millions, because it says everything words can't. His daughter Rumer once said, "Even if he can't say my name, I know he remembers every second of loving me." Those words still echo, not just through their home, but through the hearts of everyone who ever admired him. For all the explosions, the gunfire, and the one-liners that made him famous, it is this, the quiet, unspoken courage that has become his most powerful role. Because in the end, the measure of a hero isn't how many battles he wins on screen, but how gently he faces the battles no one else can fight for him. Bruce Willis may no longer be the voice that filled theaters, but he remains the heartbeat of those who love him. And perhaps that's the truest kind of immortality, not to live forever in the noise of fame, but to be remembered in the silence of love. Because even now, and always, Bruce Willis remains unbreakable. Now, at 70, Bruce Willis lives a life far removed from the flashing lights of Hollywood. A quieter existence that feels both triumphant and tragic. He is a man who built an empire from nothing. A boy from the cracked sidewalks of New Jersey who once couldn't afford a decent meal. who left home with a single suitcase and a half-eaten sandwich, and turned that hunger into a fortune worth over $250 million. It is a number that sounds abstract, almost mythical, until you remember the decades it took, the bones it broke, and the sleep it stole to earn. That fortune was not born from luck. It was carved from grit. Every film, from Die Hard to The Sixth Sense, built another layer of the empire. His $5 million paycheck for Die Hard in 1988 was unprecedented, a figure that made headlines and changed how Hollywood valued its heroes. The sequels, spanning decades, brought in more than $1.4 billion at the global box office, and his later projects, over 100 films in total, made him one of the highest-paid actors of his generation. Much of that wealth was wisely transformed into tangible legacies. Homes that whispered of peace, not power. In Beverly Hills, he owned a sprawling estate valued at over $20 million, set against sunlit canyons with floor-to-ceiling glass that opened into the California sky. In Idaho, far from the noise of fame, he built a lakeside retreat, 20 acres of quiet refuge, where snow-kissed pine trees reflected on still waters. "It's the only place I can breathe," he once said. And when he did breathe there, surrounded by silence, it was as though the boy who grew up amid shouting walls had finally found calm. His properties stretch beyond those sanctuaries: Manhattan apartments, a ranch in Montana, and a villa in Turks and Caicos, where turquoise waves crash against white stone terraces. Each home tells a story, not of excess, but of a man who had lived too long in chaos and bought serenity as his final luxury. His car collection, too, is not loud but refined. A Porsche 911, sleek and personal. A Rolls-Royce gleaming like moonlight. A Cadillac Escalade that carried him quietly from set to home after long, sleepless shoots. They are relics of motion, reminders of a man who spent half his life running toward something, or away from pain. But perhaps the most profound number of all is not in his earnings, it is in his giving. Over the years, Bruce donated millions to charities supporting veterans, children's hospitals, and first responders, the same kind of everyday heroes he once portrayed on screen. Quietly, he funded foundations in New Jersey and Los Angeles, never announcing them, never branding them. He believed that generosity, like courage, should be felt, not seen. And yet, now, the empire he built with his hands and voice is something he can no longer fully grasp. The man who once commanded billion-dollar franchises now measures wealth in moments, in a wife's touch, a daughter's laughter, the warmth of sunlight on his face. His once golden voice, the one that carried through decades of cinema, has fallen silent. His body, once unbreakable, has slowed. His mind, once sharp enough to cut through chaos, now drifts between memory and mist. It is a picture both beautiful and unbearable, the richest kind of wealth standing side by side with the most profound kind of loss. The mansions, the cars, the trophies, they remain untouched and gleaming. But the man who earned them now lives in a world measured not by what he owns, but by what he still feels. And maybe that is the truest reflection of Bruce Willis's life. Not the millions he made, but the millions he moved. He taught the world that strength wasn't about muscle or money or fame. It was about endurance, grace, and the ability to keep loving when life takes everything else away. So if you have ever smiled at his grin, held your breath as he saved the day, or found courage in his defiance, leave your tribute below. Leave a heart. Leave a memory. Because the lights may have dimmed, but the legacy still burns. He built an empire the world could see. But what he leaves behind, love, courage, resilience, is the kind of wealth no illness can steal. And in that truth, even now, Bruce Willis remains unbreakable.